Some kids don't need stricter parenting. They need less pressure, less control, less rigidity, less pushing, less constant expectation. They need more flexibility, more responsiveness, more autonomy, more room to breathe inside their nervous systems. And when you begin realizing this about your PDA, autistic, ADHD, or hypersensitive child, something unexpected happens. Your own nervous system starts reacting. Because many of us were raised inside systems built on pressure, performance, predictability, routines, compliance, and pushing through discomfort. Okay, so think about it. We all learned this, right? We learned this is how you succeed. This is how you become responsible. This is how you become safe. This is how you become good enough. So when your child cannot thrive inside those same systems, when structure creates distress instead of safety, and when flexibility works better than pressuring them, it doesn't just challenge your parenting, it challenges the very things that your nervous system learned to depend on feeling safe, lovable, belonging, and successful. And that can feel deeply destabilizing, okay? Especially if your nervous system learned to survive through predictability, perfectionism, overfunctioning, hypervigilance, or control. So today I want to talk about why flexibility, being more flexible with your child, can feel so emotionally and neurologically hard for parents. Okay, why so many of us resist being flexible, even when we intellectually understand our child needs it so much, and why parenting these children often becomes an invitation into rebuilding our own nervous systems too. So let's begin. Okay, so when my son first moved to this more internalized PDA, which is pathological demand avoidance, when he moved more to from this internalized PDA autistic presentation to a more externalized expression of PDA, things in our home started to change rapidly. Okay, so his nervous system over time, right, was carrying so much cumulative stress and activation. And then suddenly, like many of the structures and routines we had in place, the ones that I thought that were healthy, they started becoming a source of distress for him. Okay. So at the time, like I didn't understand what was happening, right? I had learned both culturally and through so much health and parenting information out there that routines were important, right? I hear this all the time, right? Routines are important. So what's routines? Like regular meals, consistent bedtimes, structure in our day, predictability in our day, schedules, right? Sticking to schedules. Okay, so to be fair, like many nervous systems, the structure and routines and schedules, it does create safety, right? So for many nervous systems, it does. And in general, like the nervous system often feels calmer when life feels more predictable and organized, right? But what I didn't understand yet was this, okay, that when a nervous system experiences pressure, demands, lack of autonomy, or lack of control as threat, right? A real visceral, unconscious threat response in their system to these things, right? Pressure, demands, lack of autonomy, and that perceived being controlled by others. Okay, then flexibility. Okay, flexibility that becomes more important for safety than the structure itself. Okay, so it's kind of paradoxical here, right? Because in a sense, structure creates safety, but then if the structure becomes a demand or a pressure or a way to control, then then it becomes a threat to the system. And what we really need then is flexibility for the nervous system to feel safe. Okay. Okay. So that completely challenged everything I knew about parenting. Okay. Because I'll tell you a bit of a bit of what happened here. Okay. So first it started with dinner. Okay. My son no longer wanted to eat at the table with us. Okay. He wanted to eat later on the couch, right? Like not at the same time as us. He wanted to eat later on the couch in front of the TV. Okay, so at first, I resisted this, right? Because in my mind, I was like, This is creating a bad habit. Like, what is this? This is a bad habit. And, families should eat together, right? So I thought, this isn't healthy. This isn't good parenting. Kids need routines, they need structure. I need to hold the boundary, right? But then the more I pushed, the more his nervous system pushed back and then would not even eat. Okay, so that scared me. Okay. And then came sleep. Okay. So this one was especially hard for me because nighttime had become the only time I had to myself, right? So when my son was younger, we could have sleep routines generally within, 30 minutes of some timing in there, but generally like he went to sleep the same time every night. And then this started to change, right? And for me, like sleep is my master regulator. Okay. I love my sleep more than anything else. Okay. I desperately needed those hours at night to recover too. Okay. And I was terrified that if he stayed up too late, that his dysregulation would be even worse the next day. Right. So I kept trying to force sleep. Okay. And instead, I often ended up awake with him until 1 a.m. with all this aggression, destruction, screaming, chaos, right? And total nervous system despair on my part. Okay. So I remember standing in the hallway some nights, feeling my whole body tighten as the hours got later and later. I could feel panic rising in my chest while my thoughts spiraled. Okay. He's going to be exhausted tomorrow. This is so unhealthy. I can't keep living like this. What are we doing? How is this sustainable? Okay. Sleep was huge for me. It was like a massive trigger. Okay. And then under all of this was this desperate need to regain control, right? Because control felt like the only thing standing between us and complete chaos, right? I needed to have control over the sleep thing. Okay. Then another thing, right? Then school became another collision point. Okay. He stopped going to school. And then I tried to recreate structure through homeschooling. Okay. I told myself, okay, like if we can just do an hour even or 2 hours a day, then I can feel okay about the rest of the day, right? And I feel like at that time I was like, then the rest of the day can be wasted, right? Because we weren't doing all these things in the day. Okay, but even hearing that now, I can hear how much my own nervous system needed productivity and structure to feel emotionally safe, right? So I even hired a play-based tutor, okay? But my son felt the pressure underneath it all. And eventually he stopped wanting to learn altogether for years, okay? So I pushed too hard on that. So at the time, I thought flexibility meant, okay, this is what I thought flexibility meant, okay? And this is what I think a lot of parents think flexibility means, right? It feels like we're giving up. It feels like we're being permissive. It feels like if we're flexible, we're somehow failing or letting things fall apart, right? So this is what it feels like in our nervous system because of the meanings we have around being a more flexible parent. Okay, what I didn't understand was that my son's nervous system was not resisting safety, okay? It was resisting pressure. Okay, so I thought like the structure and the control meant more safety, but really it was a threat to his system and he was resisting this pressure, right? And underneath all of this, okay, was my own nervous system. Because the truth is, I didn't only struggle giving flexibility to him, I struggled giving flexibility to myself too. Okay, so here's the mirror, my friends, the mirror that our kids will always show us that we think it's about them, but it is about us too. Okay. So every time I learned about something, so like for example, every time I learned something healthy for my body, right? Like I needed to eat a certain way or exercise a certain way. Or if I felt like, okay, I needed to get something done, like I should be able to get this done within this timeline, right? Then I turned it into another rigid demand. Okay, but this was really unconscious. I was not aware of this pattern. Okay. It was another thing I had to do correctly and within a certain timeline. And so it was another way to succeed at being human. Okay, so even when I was exhausted and when my body wanted rest, And when I didn't have capacity, my mind would override my nervous system saying, no, got to do it. Like, this is what successful people do. Okay. If I don't do this, then I'm failing again. Can't get this thing done. That means I'm failing again. Okay. So I would override my nervous system, right? And now I see so many parents living this exact way with themselves and their children, right? And they think that it's a must, like I have to override all the time, right? But I'm going to challenge this. It's not a must, right? It feels that way and it makes total sense, right? Constantly like overriding our bodies, constantly pressuring ourselves, constantly trying to force routines and structures because we think all this stuff needs to get done in our day, right? Having all these expectations of our child that their nervous systems cannot tolerate, right? While underneath it lives this deep fear, okay, that if I stop pushing, everything will fall apart, okay? And so it's really important to gain awareness that these are deep patterns that come from our childhood. Okay. So this is where, it's important to understand that this is also much deeper than just parenting strategies here, right? Like it all pertains to like how we're deeply wired. Okay. Because for many parents, flexibility doesn't just feel emotionally uncomfortable. It feels neurologically destabilizing, right? Our nervous systems go into fight flight when we need to be more flexible with our child in the moment, and yet our nervous system and our brain has this expectation of how things should be. Okay, so many of us have nervous systems, right, that where we learned to survive through environments that were, we learned to survive in environments that said we had to have predictability, certainty, control, structure, right? That we should overfunction, we should pressure ourselves to get things done, and like rigid rules, right? So think about it, like many of us grew up in these environments, and so it's just all embedded in our nervous system, right? So structure became associated with safety. Okay, so structure became associated with safety, right? Predictability became associated with survival, and control became associated with reducing danger. Okay, so when parenting starts requiring flexibility, which our kids need, instead of rigidity, then your nervous system can interpret that shift as threat to what helped you be safe, lovable, belonging, and successful in life. Okay, so it's completely going against all your programming. Okay, so and it's not just intellectual. Okay, so it's important to understand it's not living in the mind alone. Our brain does take on these meanings and it does act out through our bodies. It's very biological and is wired into the nervous system as patterns of behavior that we launch into when what we have learned as safety is threatened. Okay. Nervous system does not like change, my friends. Okay. Even if that change is good for us and everyone in our family. So this is such an important layer to understand compassionately, because many parents listening, okay, are not simply like, you're not just simply bad at flexibility. Okay. You're not bad at flexibility. Okay. But your nervous system genuinely experiences uncertainty as unsafe. Okay, and that makes sense because many nervous systems do, but it becomes especially exacerbated, right? Uncertainty can feel especially unsafe if you have a traumatized nervous system. Like, how much trauma have you had, right? You have a more hypervigilant nervous system, right? More sensitive, more hypervigilant, more sensory overload nervous system, right? That becomes more hypervigilant, a more perfectionistic nervous system, a highly anxious nervous system, a neurodivergent, right? Autistic, ADHD nervous system, okay? Or you've had attachment injuries, which is traumas, and and over time, right, your nervous system was shaped by over control, criticism, right, depending on the environment you grew up in, Unpredictability. Maybe the environment you grew up in was unpredictable, right? Or there was a lot of chronic stress. And then, so what did your nervous system learn to do to survive? Okay, it learned rigidity to protect you, right? So maybe rules reduced anxiety for you. Maybe predictability reduced overwhelm for you. Maybe overfunctioning reduced vulnerability for you. Okay, maybe control reduced fear for you. Okay, that's a big one. Most of us go into control to help us not feel fear. Okay, so when your child suddenly says they don't want to go to an activity, right? So you already committed to this thing, like a birthday party or going to a friend's house or family's house, right? And then they say no, right? Or they can't tolerate the bedtime routine anymore. They are pushing back against when they go to sleep, right? Another story, another show they want. Or they refuse the plan that you carefully organized, right? For the day to go out with the family, okay? Then your body may react before your mind even has time to process what's happening. Okay. You may feel your chest tighten immediately, your thoughts start racing. Ah, we already paid for this. They can't just quit. They need to learn commitment. This is not how life works. What will people think? They can't avoid everything forever. Okay, these are the common thoughts and meanings that we make that come up, right? When we have these kinds of situations happen. Okay, and then we have this suddenly there's this urgency in our body to regain control of this situation. Okay, and it's not because you're trying to be controlling, but because this unpredictability itself is making your nervous system feel unsafe. Okay, when you start seeing this through a nervous system lens instead of a moral lens, something often begins softening because maybe you were never simply too controlling. Maybe your nervous system learned to survive through certainty. Okay, maybe rigidity became the way that your body learned to reduce fear. And maybe overfunctioning became the way that you tried to create safety. Okay, and maybe pushing through. Okay, I can't tell you how many times I pushed through things. Still working on that, my friends. It became the way you learned to stay safe, loved, accepted, successful, or enough, right? Push through, override your true self, override what your nervous system needs. Push, push, push. We live in a culture, my friends, that encourages this and celebrates it. Okay. So this is not really a conversation here about good parenting versus bad parenting, right? This becomes more a conversation about your nervous system is just trying to feel safe. Okay. Everything comes down to feeling safe. And remember, feeling safe, okay, and survival is about feeling loved, connected, belonging, successful, all of that. Okay. So this is where parenting a PDA, autistic, or hypersensitive, high needs child can feel so incredibly hard, okay? Because there is this collision that's happening between their nervous system and your nervous system, okay? Because what does your child need? Your child needs more flexibility, more autonomy, more responsiveness, less controlling, okay? More room to move between nervous system states safely. But many of us, we were conditioned around compliance. Compliance is a big one. Productivity, that's another big one. Pushing through performance and doing it anyways. Okay. So parenting our children creates a collision between their nervous system needs, okay, and then the survival patterns that our nervous systems learned to depend on, okay, to feel like we are enough and we are successful in this world. Okay, so it's challenging because part of you understands, okay, that your child, you understand your child, you're beginning to understand your child, what they need. Okay, but then another part of you panics. Okay, so you may genuinely want to accommodate more. Okay, and you want to be more flexible and let them watch an extra show tonight. Okay, and be with them and present with them in that, have more connection time in that. Okay. And then suddenly you feel overwhelmed by fear that you're doing something wrong, or what does this mean about their future, right? Or self-judgment, right? We judge ourselves. What would other people think? And then we judge ourselves. Okay, so you may say yes to your child eating on the couch instead of the table, and then spend the next hour spiraling and ruminating in your own mind, asking yourself, am I creating bad habits? What if this never changes? Okay, what am I failing to parent properly? Okay, we all question ourselves in this way. Okay, or maybe you let go of forcing school temporarily because your child is clearly in burnout, but then your body feels flooded all day with anxiety and catastrophic thinking about the future. Okay, what if they never recover? Okay, what if they never go back to school? What if I'm ruining their future? Okay, and this is why I think so many parents feel exhausted living inside this work, trying to do this work, right, of helping their child, because we're not only supporting a highly stressed child's nervous system, we're also constantly trying to regulate the fear and uncertainty that gets triggered with letting go of the old programs and conditioning and control that lives wired deeply inside our own nervous systems at the same time. So this is what makes it really hard. Okay. So let's understand, okay, the difference between rule-based safety and nervous system safety, because I think this is important, okay? Like, I want to be clear here. Structure itself is not bad, okay? Routines are not bad. Predictability is not bad, okay? Many nervous systems, like, we generally thrive with them, right? Go to sleep at the same time every day, wake at the same time every day, eat the meals the same time every day. Like, our nervous systems do thrive on that, okay? The deeper issue is what happens when structure becomes rigid and disconnected from nervous system reality, okay? Because many of us were taught that good parenting equals consistency no matter what, okay? But responsive nervous systems work differently. Okay, so for many PDA, autistic, hypersensitive children, flexibility creates safety, right? Because autonomy creates safety. So I'm just going to walk through some scenarios here and like reframe them so you can get an idea of what's happening here as we move from more of this rule-based rigidity to more flexibility and what it sounds like. Okay, so like bedtime. So instead of, okay, bedtime is 8 p.m. no matter what. I'm just laughing because I used to be like this. And I'm laughing because, oh, it created so much stress for me back then. Okay, so instead of bedtime is 8 p.m. no matter what, the nervous system may need, I can see your body is still highly activated right now. So let's help your nervous system settle first, right? Our child may need to fill up more with connection, or they may need our help to feel safer, to let them release this. They may need a little bit of movement first and then coming down, right? Okay, so that's moving more towards being flexible. So, okay, sitting at the table to eat. Okay, instead of you must sit at the table to eat when the whole family sits and eats, right? The nervous system, what it may need, okay, so when you start looking through the lens of the nervous system may need, okay, your body feels safer eating somewhere else right now or at a different time right now, right? So that's what feels safer for your body right now. In order to feel like you have more autonomy and control, that helps you access the ability to eat, right? So we're looking at this through a nervous system lens. Okay, then instead of, okay, you need to push through school, right? You need to push through, you need to go to school, you need to push through school. Like, I just got to push through to get there, push through your day, and then come back. And then you're like a dysregulated mess. Okay. That's what happens, okay, when we push through. So the nervous system may need instead, okay, your nervous system is overloaded and it needs recovery before capacity can rebuild, right? It needs more recovery, more safety before you have capacity to be able to handle the challenge of school. Okay, so it's looking at it from a nervous system lens and really seeing that from a nervous system lens. Okay, but this can feel deeply destabilizing for parents because many of us were conditioned to believe that consistency equals good parenting, adaptation to what your system needs, which is what we're trying to help our kids do. So instead, adaptation to what your system needs feels like failure because we're not following normative standards, right? And instead, we're following what we need, and what we need is not the norm. So that must mean it's bad in some way. And that we learn that flexibility is permissiveness. So if I say, okay, you don't have to go to school today because your capacity is low, then I'm being permissive in some way, right? Or control is responsibility, right? Equals responsibility, right? Like I have to maintain control over my child and what they do because that makes me a responsible parent. Okay, and on top of this, being flexible requires us to tolerate all the uncertainty. Oh gosh, the uncertainty and the fear that comes with not knowing where these changes will lead our child, right? So if I'm more flexible, will it help them? Will it hinder them? Are we doing this right? Like our brain wants certainty, our nervous system wants certainty. So learning how to work with this fear and helping our nervous system tolerate uncertainty becomes a huge part of feeling safe enough to be more flexible with your child. Okay, so if we want to give our kids what they need, which is more flexibility, then what is being asked of us is this, okay? Shifting from rule-based safety to relationship-based safety, shifting from rigidity to instead responsiveness, right? We respond to the present moment of what's needed, not to the rigid rules and how the rigid rules say it should be. Okay. And shifting from control to co-regulation, right? Your survival system will want to go into control based on the meanings it's making, but we need to shift to co-regulation because that creates safety first, and only within safety can we introduce challenge again. Okay. There needs to be capacity in the system. Okay. And honestly, I think this is where many of us begin realizing something much deeper underneath all of this. Okay. That some of what we learned was safety was actually survival. Because true regulation is about being flexible. True regulation has flexibility built into it. Okay. A truly regulated nervous system can adapt when life changes. It can tolerate uncertainty and when things don't go the way that we imagined. Okay. And it can bend, right? We can bend and be flexible without completely collapsing. And it can recover after disruption, right? But many of us were taught forms of safety that depended on control, right? That thing, and this is what control is. Things have to go a certain way. Okay, we have to perform a certain way. Our children have to behave a certain way to be okay in the world. Life had to look a certain way. Okay? And when it didn't, then when it doesn't, our nervous systems react as though something dangerous is happening. Okay? And this is what we learned, right? So you can even feel this in everyday moment with our kids, right? So like maybe your child suddenly can't tolerate a family event that you committed to, right? They just don't have the capacity to do it. And immediately your nervous system reacts. We can't cancel. This is not okay. This is becoming too much. They need to learn to push through, right? And we can't live like this. Okay. Or maybe your child needs a slower day after several hard nervous system days, but your body starts reacting to the lack of productivity or structure. You find yourself feeling like restless, anxious, guilty, or emotionally unsafe doing nothing. Okay. Not because rest is actually dangerous, but because your nervous system learned to associate productivity, structure, and performance with safety, worth, success, or lovability. Okay. And I think this understanding creates so much compassion because many of us were never taught true nervous system regulation. We were taught survival-based forms of safety. Okay. We learned certainty equals safety, control equals safety, predictability equals safety, performance equals safety, external approval equals safety. Okay, but true regulation is deeper than that. True regulation does not require life to stay rigid in order for us to remain connected to ourselves and feel okay in our daily existence. True regulation has flexibility built into it. And I honestly think that our children are challenging us into rebuilding this kind of flexibility from the inside out. Okay. Okay. So these survival patterns, right? There's one more thing I want to talk about, this rigidity. Okay. These survival patterns, they really can become what's called cognitive rigidity. Okay. So something psychologists like sometimes call cognitive rigidity is essentially difficulty adapting to change, okay, shifting perspectives, tolerating uncertainty, or letting go of fixed expectations when things are not going the way that we imagined or planned, okay? And often, okay, we think rigidity as simply a personality trait or a thinking problem. But I think for many nervous systems, it goes much deeper than that. Okay, because nervous systems that spend years organizing around certainty, control, pressure, predictability, or performance can eventually struggle to tolerate flexibility, uncertainty, or changes to expectation. Okay, so just notice, is that your nervous system, right? No shame in this. A lot of us grew up in these kinds of environments, or we've had traumas that made our nervous system this way, right? So rigidity is not just a mindset. It can become a nervous system survival strategy, okay? Especially if you grew up around criticism and high expectations and an unpredictable environment, or conditional love or pressure from your caregivers, right? Or environments where mistakes didn't feel emotionally safe. Okay, so over time, the nervous system can begin attaching safety to having a plan, knowing what's happening, things going the right way, quote unquote, or life staying predictable. Okay, so just notice, is that you? Like, do you get attached to having a plan, knowing what's happening, things going a certain way, or there's a right way that things should go, or that life has to stay predictable in some way, right? Okay, and this obviously shows up in very ordinary parenting moments. So let's take an example here. So, okay, so maybe you spend hours preparing your child for an outing. Okay, you mentally rehearse the whole day, you pack snacks, you organize the time and carefully, you finally get yourself emotionally ready, right? I can't tell you how many times I've done this, especially with a child who's been housebound on and off. And then finally we're ready to go out. We make this plan and we put everything together, and I spend all this time preparing, okay? And then 5 minutes before you're leaving, your child suddenly says, I'm not going. And then your body reacts even before your higher thinking brain can reason with it, right? You feel heat rise in your chest, your jaw tightens, your thoughts immediately move towards, we can't keep doing this. This is ridiculous. They can't control everything. Or you drop into despair and hopelessness. Okay. And it's not because you're a bad parent. It's because your nervous system had emotionally attached safety to the plan, staying predictable, or even attached, hope, right, to it. And when the predictability disappears, or that hope that was lingering there for a moment disappears, your nervous system experiences threat. Okay. And again, this understanding creates so much compassion because it helps us stop seeing ourselves as failing and start understanding the deeper nervous system patterns underneath our reactions. Okay. So how do we let go of control, right? How do we let go of control, structure, routines, all of that, and embrace flexibility and really trust what the nervous system needs, right? Without going into threat, future fears, or feeling like we are failing our child in some way. How do we do that? Okay, so I think the overall shift that we're trying to make is this, right? We're trying to move from being rigidly attached to expectations, okay, about how things should go, okay, and instead move toward becoming more responsive to what the nervous system actually needs in the moment or on that particular day. Okay. So this is really important, right? We're moving from being attached to expectations to learning to let it go of expectations and instead see our child through a nervous system lens so that we can respond to what that nervous system needs in that moment or on that day. Okay, so this is a huge shift for us because we were not raised this way. We don't have models around this. Most of us don't, right? So we need to rebuild this, right? Okay. We also we want to prioritize staying connected rather than needing to control it all, right? Connection over compliance and control. Okay, but in order to do this, we first have to become aware of the conditioning, programming, expectations, fears, and emotional meanings driving our reactions, right? Awareness first. Because often when our child pushes back against structure, routines, demands, or expectations, it doesn't only trigger frustration, right? It triggers fear. It triggers our future fears, like fear that they're not going to be okay and that they won't succeed and that somehow we are failing them. Okay. And then sometimes grief gets triggered too here. Okay. Grief that life looks so different than what we imagined, that, the parenting approaches that we thought would work, they're not working. Grief that certainty and predictability no longer feel available in that same way, right? So we're not getting what we may need, our nervous systems may need. So there's a loss of that. Okay, so the work is not simply like be more flexible. The work is learning how to support what gets triggered inside of us when flexibility is required. Okay, because when you can support this fear, the uncertainty, the grief, all the conditioning that gets activated, when you can see it clearly and support it, help yourself to feel safe within this programming that's a survival programming that's getting triggered, then your nervous system can come back to regulation and your higher thinking brain, right? And then that's where you gain access to having more clarity and perspective and understanding and, wait for it, flexibility. Okay. So we do not force ourselves into flexibility, okay? We build capacity for flexibility by continuing to help ourselves feel safe in the face of change and uncertainty and nervous system discomfort. Okay, so one thing that's a constant with our kids is there's always going to be change, and we're always going to need to adapt to be flexible in some way. Okay, so the first step is awareness, right? Begin to notice the patterns of reaction inside your own nervous system when your child cannot handle the demand or pushes back against structure or doesn't have capacity for what is being asked of them. Okay, so what automatically happens inside your body? Okay, so first we become aware of the body reaction. Do you tense up immediately? Do you feel panic, urgency, pressure? Okay. What's the behavior that comes out immediately, right? Do you need to convince, control, or force a different outcome? Okay. Does your mind automatically move to, oh, they need structure, they'll need consistency, they'll be worse tomorrow if they don't sleep, they need to learn, we can't keep doing this? Okay. Does your brain immediately interpret the behavior as intentional rather than seeing it like, oh, my child's nervous system does not have capacity or enough felt safety for this expectation right now? Okay, that's the reframe that we want to move into, right? But instead, your brain might immediately be judging yourself, right? Judging them, judging yourself for your own reactions, right? So begin getting curious, okay? So we want to notice our body reaction, notice the behavior and the pattern we automatically launch into, okay? And then notice like what is the automatic thoughts that come up that tells us the meaning our system is making, okay? And and then you can ask yourself, you get quiet and you ask yourself and you wait and you hear back, okay? You ask yourself this question. What is my nervous system afraid will happen here? What is my nervous system afraid will happen here if I don't control this in some way? Okay, because underneath rigidity are often very deep fears. Okay. If I don't push, they'll fail. Well, then that leads to I'm failing as a parent. Okay. If I let go, everything will collapse. Okay. So it's this fear of like everything will collapse, get ruined. If I stop controlling this, I'm failing as a parent. So this is really what it all comes down to is it feels like I'm going to fail as a parent. I'm not enough. Right. And if things don't look normal, they won't be okay. And if they're not okay, then I'm failing and I'm not enough. That's what it all comes down to. Okay. So these are survival level emotional meanings, okay, that we have taken on from before that get exacerbated, right? It comes from family systems, school systems, attachment wounds, trauma, perfectionism, culture, chronic stress, okay? And many of us inherited nervous systems shaped around pressure and performance, right? This gets passed on from generation to generation in the family system, okay? And where this is conditioning, okay, because this is conditioning, there will always be fear. Okay, so a huge part of the work becomes learning how to support and regulate the fear instead of automatically obeying it or listening to it as truth, right? We want to notice the fear, name the fear, feel where it lives in your body, and help your nervous system come back to safety in the present moment through body-based regulation strategies first, because that is often the fastest path back to regulation, right? Contain the fear, help it, hold space for it, unblend from it, allow it to be here, but bring safety cues to it. Okay. So this work is not about shaming yourself for struggling with flexibility. If you are, it's about slowly helping your nervous system experiencing something new, right? That safety can exist even when things are not fully predictable. Okay. That flexibility is not failure. Okay. And that responsiveness is not weakness, right? So every time we can bring in a felt sense of safety when our fear gets triggered, then we are helping our system learn that, yes, I'm taking this chance on flexibility. The future is uncertain. I'm not sure where this is going to lead, right? But I can feel safe enough right here, right now within it to stay flexible, to give my child what they need, right? And honestly, this is relieving for your nervous system too, okay? Because it definitely was for mine, okay? And this is where I think our children are teaching us something very profound, okay? This is not just about parenting. It's about being human, okay? Because many of us were never taught how to live with flexibility and responsiveness and nervous system attunement or self-compassion, okay? We were taught push through, perform, okay? Override, comply, hold it together, keep going no matter what. And many of us became deeply disconnected from our own bodies in the process. I don't know about you, but I did for sure. Okay. And it takes time of getting into the body and really noticing this. You may not be fully aware of it now, but really sit with this and begin to become aware. Okay. Because flexibility changes that. Flexibility asks, what does the nervous system need right now? Not what should this nervous system be able to do? Okay, so that's the big shift. What does the nervous system need right now? Not what should this nervous system be able to do according to all these other standards of what society and culture and media and everyone else says. Okay, that's a huge shift and it's incredibly freeing. It's freeing. And over time, okay, that question doesn't only begin changing how you parent your child, it starts changing how you relate to yourself too, okay? You may begin noticing that you give yourself a break more, you rest more, you push less, you adapt more easily, you judge yourself less harshly, and slowly release some of the relentless pressure that you've carried for years. Okay, because maybe your child is not only asking you to rethink parenting, maybe they're asking you to rethink what safety, success, strength, and regulation actually mean. Maybe they are inviting you to build a nervous system that no longer depends on control, pressure, performance, or certainty in order to feel okay or enough. Okay. A nervous system that can stay connected to itself even when life feels uncertain, messy, different, or unpredictable. Okay. And maybe that is part of the deeper healing inside all of this. Not just helping our children feel safer being who they are, but slowly learning how to feel safer being human ourselves. So if this helped you, if this spoke to you in some way, please comment. I love hearing your comments. Please share with others. Maybe another parent needs to hear this messaging too. Thank you for being here today.